if you added our first year's salary plus the bonus, we got about $25,000 apiece. That was good money in those days. But what we did, we gave it all to our dad. We bought him a house, we bought him a car, gave him the rest of the money, and he got mad at us when we had to get some money back from him to pay the income taxes. But Edward will continue the story of, Jean thought I had a lot of money when we got married. Boy, was she kidding. Anyway, Ed, tell what happened later when the chief passed away.
Oh, yes. Well, that was 1953. But we were used to that. Maybe it seems a little strange, but the Irish families in those days, you always turn your money into the head of the family. And then they dispersed it like little for you, little for you, little for you.
I'd like to remind you, I'm the head of the family now.
And so when we got this money, we turned it in. Had our $6,000 contract with Pittsburgh, which was it shows you how things have changed. $4,000 was the minimum salary in baseball in 1953 when we signed. The minimum salary today is $497,000. So we signed a little early.
Yeah, if we signed today, we'd be 83 years old.
Yeah. So the chief passes on in 1955. So John Monahan informs us he's got a will. He's got a will. So we have to go down and sit there with him, and he's going to read us this will. It started out to John Thomas O'Brien, Edward Joseph O'Brien, James Stephen O'Brien, William, what was Bill's middle name? William Michael O'Brien. My undying love and $1. To my daughter Teresa, I leave my estate. So he gave all the money to our sister. So what we did is we always say that we signed with Pittsburgh for $6,000 and our sister signed with them for $20,000. But there was no jealousy about it. It was in the family.
And going a little further, we've never gotten that dollar yet. When we got to spring training in Havana, the first thing the clubhouse guy said to me was, "What number do you want?" I said, "Luke Eric has been my idol my entire life. I want number 4. He said, "You got it if you can talk Ralph Kiner out of it." My first year in Pittsburgh, I was number 30. And Branch Rickey called us in, and he had the big Panama hat on that he always had with the deal. He said, "Edward, what did you play at Seattle University?" And Ed says, "Mr. Rickey, I was a center fielder." He said, "Wonderful. You're my shortstop."
First game I
And
ever...
we're got like Disney. He said, "What about you, John?" I said, "I played shortstop and third base, Mr. Rickey." "Wonderful. You're my second baseman." And so we after we got over this stuff, what we do, we'd work out with the team, and then afterwards we'd play in a game, and then after that they were making Ed a shortstop, and Ed had a rifle arm, and they'd have Branch Rickey be sitting behind the screen with a big bullhorn and that big Panama hat on, and they'd be hitting balls. Clyde Supford would hit him to the Ed at shortstop. He'd fire him over to first base at Sam Narron, and Rickey say, "Wonderful, that's Pee Wee Reese. That's Pee Wee Reese." And they kept hitting these balls, and Rickey kept saying, "That's Pee Wee Reese." And finally Rickey said, "Let's have a double play." So they hit the ball to Ed. I come to second base. He forgets he's not a center fielder anymore. Pow! He nailed me. I said, "Ed, you just put the ball up there nicely, then I can make the pivot now." Well, here's Rickey. "Oh, that's wonderful. That's Pee Wee Reese." And finally, after about the third time of this, I went over to the mound and I yelled, "Mr. Rickey, that may be Pee Wee Reese, but he's killing Jackie Robinson." And Rickey said, "Ho, ho, ho, hit another ball, Edward."
I'll interrupt him and tell a Jackie Robinson story. He played in '53. You know, it was later years for him. He was playing second base, and we're playing him one day, and he's on second base. And what we did is we we had pickoff attempts, and you had two doubles, pickoff attempts. The one was where the shortstop would come in behind the runner, and if the pitcher saw any daylight between the shortstop and the runner, he would turn and fire at the bag at second base, and you'd beat the runner to the bag and tag him out. And the other one was a little different. You came in and put that one on, but you did it so that the runner could get back, because once you started going back, the runner started going back. So we put it on, so it was a double, what you call a double. And what the pitcher would do, he'd be standing there like this here, and the sign comes from the catcher when to throw. And I got Robinson off the bag, and I ran him back, and then as I came off, John came in from the other side, and we turned and fired and picked him off. Well, he spent the whole season wanting us to tell him how we did it. Nobody picks me off, he said. Nobody picks me off. How'd you do it? I said, I can't tell you, Jackie. He's just going to do it again. But he was that type of competitor. And around the league, in later years, and around the league was don't wake him up. He could beat you with the bat. He could beat you stealing. He could beat you with his glove. The right person for Ricky to bring up, to integrate the leagues. That's perfect.
In those days, the Pittsburgh Pirates were rebuilding. Matter of fact, we used to say we celebrated when we got rained out. And when we left spring training, and what they did, they sent us over to Moultrie, Georgia to play, and we would start playing in team games at 9 in the morning. We'd play maybe 4 or 5 games in a day, just to get ready for the major leagues. And then we went into to Brooklyn to start our major league careers, and this wasn't too bad. We're sitting on the bench, have batting practice, sitting on the bench, and get paid for it every 2 weeks. That didn't sound too bad. But we were over in Pittsburgh, and we're playing again the Dodgers, and we're getting the heck beat out of us. And it's the third inning, and I think we're behind about 9-0. And Freddie Haney turns to me, and he yells, Johnny, he says, go on up and hit one. So I look out on the mound, and there's Carl Erskine, one of the better pitchers of the Dodgers. I go by Ralph Kiner, and Kiner says, sneaky fastball. I go by Metkovich, and Metkovich says, the best curveball in the league. I go by Eddie Pellegrini, and says, watch out for the changeup. By this time, I don't want to get out of the dugout, but I grab a bat, and I put the helmet on, and I go up, and I look down at the third base coach, and I get the take sign. So I step in there, and Donatelli was the umpire. And the first pitch is a dinky little curveball. And it comes over the plate. And Donatelli's strike one. I stepped out and I said, that's the best curveball in this league. He wound up through the next one, and it went, and my mouth went just like that. And Donatelli said, that's his good curveball. That's the right too. And so I fouled off a couple pitches, and he threw that good curveball again, and I took half of the air out of Forbes Field, and I struck out. And I'm walking across the plate, and here's Roy Campanella, and he said, Johnny, he said, them basketballs don't curve, do they? First time up in the major league. See, there were only 8 teams in each league. So everybody knew everything about one another. And so it was funny, like Camparillo we'd play 22 times a year against one another, 11 at home, 11 on the road. We played against one another in spring training, so everyone knew one, and you had friends on all the other teams. And I'll never forget one year, Carl Furillo was kind of my buddy on the Dodgers, and he said, he says, what'd you do over the winter? I said, I worked for the coroner out in Seattle picking up stiffs. He said, what? I said, worked for the coroner. He said, how the hell could you do that? I says, hell, I never got a complaint from any of my customers. And he would tell me about Campy worked in the liquor store, and Jackie Robinson did this, and Hodges did that. And when you played the Dodgers, you were looking at Roy Campanella catching, Gil Hodges at first, Jackie Robinson at second, Pee Wee Reese at short, Billy Cox at third, Andy Papko left, Duke Snyder at center, Carl Furillo in right, and great pitchers. And that's why they were in the World Series every year. But here, as a comparison to today, if you didn't win the World Series in our day, you had to get a job to get to the next year. And here were these Dodgers, most of who wound up in the Hall of Fame. If they didn't win the World Series, Yankees did most of the time, they had to get a job to get to the next year. Nowadays, you heard that it says $491,000 is the minimum salary. The average salary of a major league player today is $3,500,000. And as it wound up, Ed and I wound up playing. Ed wound up playing 7 different positions in the major leagues. I wound up playing 6. And today we'd be worth a lot of money. So I agree. We signed a little bit early. And in those days, you did what the manager wanted. I mean, today, I think the players, the manager's trying to please the players. In our day, it was the players trying to please the manager. And so it's a totally different situation than we had. And I never forget one time, we had a catcher named Hank Foyles. And he trips on the tarpaulin and hits his mouth on the railing. And he's got 37 stitches in and out. So he can't catch. You know, and even the foul tip is going to break the stitches. So Murtaugh's our manager at that time, and he'd always be like this. And he said, sport. And when Murtaugh said sport, something was up. Danny Kravitz was our only catcher left. And I'm coming out of the batting cage, and Murtaugh said, hey, sport. I said, yes, Skip. He said, why don't you put on the tools of ignorance and catch some batting practice? I said, you gotta be kidding. I said, I got a wife and 3 kids. And I improved on that later on too. And he said, okay, he said, but if Kravitz gets tossed or hurt, you're it. The next thing I'm catching batting practice, I got ball marks. I'm getting hit everywhere you can get hit. But I finally learned how to keep my eyes open. I was the backup catcher now. And, you know, I never knew what kind of a glove to bring to the ball game. Because I'd be catching, pitching, playing the infield, playing first base, and you did whatever the manager wanted. And I'll never forget, we got in a riot with the Giants. I was in the bullpen. I broke the world's record getting into that fight, not to be in the fight, but to get Kravitz out of the fight. Because if Kravitz got tossed, I'm in. And I got tackled by Ed Nelly, the pitcher, and Danny O'Connell. And I got knocked down, and they're on top of me, and they're saying, we don't have to fight, just make people rest. And I said, get the hell out of here, I got to get Kravitz. And I look around, and Kravitz shoves Dascoli, the umpire, from behind. And Dascoli's down in the dirt, and he's trying to turn with his big nose in the way to find out who to throw out. And I get off of Aunt Nellie, and I start at Kravitz, and Murtaugh falls on top over me and lands on Dascoli. And Dascoli throws Murtaugh out of the game. So then I finally got to Kravitz, and I put my arms around, I couldn't hold him, he was so strong. But that was when Mays, Cepeda grabbed the bat and was going to use the bat to hit somebody, and a cop came by with a sap and was going to nail him, and Mays knocked Cepeda down, and that stopped the fight. But that's how close I came to catching in the major leagues, and that would have been really a disaster. Now, you got something to say at this point, Ed?
Yeah, I think I will have something to say.
There are some times when people always ask us, what's it like, or how can, the question they always ask us is, how can you jump so high? And there's no answer for it. You can either jump or you can't jump. You know, they teach me some of the mechanics, but so the second best thing is, what's it like to be twins? And sometimes it isn't fair.
Well,
I got
about being twins. He said, what's it like to be twins? He said, well, how the heck do we know? We were never anything different.
I think I've come up short a little bit on being twins. And I got a few things I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to take these one at a time. I'm going to take one and then give it back to you for some more of your brilliance, and then I'll pick another up. But
do what you want.
there's four things that I marked down here, and the first one was getting my points in a basketball game. This is why John became the scorer and I became the passer. When Charlie Eppinger, going back to yesterday, our coach, put us into a game in South Amboy, New Jersey, he started John a couple games before me, and then finally one day he starts the both of us in a game against St. Mary's of Perth Amboy, New Jersey. So the game goes on, and I get 4 points, and John gets 4 points in the game. That's all we got each. So I pick up the Perth Amboy News the next day, and it's Ed O'Brien, 0-0-0. John O'Brien, 4 baskets, 8 points. So I decided, well, if I'm not going to get the points, I might as well pass him the ball. But we're in spring training, and the way they brought 50 players to camp. And they divided it into 2 teams, and then eventually would cut it down, pare it down until they finally got the 25 players going to play. And I was on one team one year, and John's on the other team. So we all worked out in the morning. And then when we finished the workout, the one team would go play a game, and the other one had the afternoon off. So it's my day for the afternoon off, and John's going to play. So we worked out in the morning, worked over all the different things. And boom, here comes 12 o'clock, so we're through for the day. I go in, shower, put my dress clothes on. John's still in the uniform because he's going to play. So I had a bite to eat. They always provided lunch. And the game's going to start, and we're playing, I think it was Philadelphia, because the pitcher was Bobby Shantz, a little left.
No, he was Kansas City at the time. You weren't there. How the hell did you know?
Bobby Shantz from Kansas City was the pitcher. So I go out and I sit in the stands to see if he's going to play at all. And in the bottom of the 3rd inning, Bob Friend was pitching for us. They announced John O'Brien hitting for Bob Friend. So I watch him. The first pitch from Bobby Shantz of Kansas City hits John right in the back. So he goes down to first base, and I wait. At the end of the inning, he doesn't win the game, so he's done. So I go down to the beach, and I'm, sunning myself down there on the beach. And later on, down he comes, and he said, "I thought I'd tell you before you get mad." I said, "What's up?" He said, "Well, did you watch me hit?" I said, "Yeah, you got hit in the back. I thought you'd be down here a long while ago." He said, "Well, I figured that was not a full day's work." He said, "So I went in and talked to Bobby Bregan, the manager, and said, you know, Bob, I look like another guy on this team." Manager says, "All right, go do it." So he said, I went in, I put your jersey on. He said, "And if you read the paper tomorrow morning, while you were laying on the beach, you grounded out short to first."
But you hit the ball hard.
Yeah, that's what he said, but you hit the ball hard. So that's just 2. I got 2 more. So go ahead, John.
Well, as I said, the Pirates, we were rebuilding in those years, and we had a cast of characters you wouldn't believe, and one of them was Joe Garagiola. And I like to tell the story, and I'm going to bumble around at different things, and both Ed and I guarantee that in all of this stuff we're saying to you, it will be a minimum of 70% accurate. We're playing the Phillies in one night in Forbes Field, and Joe Garagiola's catching for us. And Danny O'Connell's playing third base at 5'8". Ed's at shortstop, 5'8.5". I'm at second base, 5'9". Paul Smith's at first base, 5'8". And Murray Dixon is pitching, and Murray is 5'6". So they play the anthem, about to start the game, and Garagiola calls time. And all the umpires, he gets in, and Dusty Bodge was second base umpire, so they all meet with Garagiola. And Dusty comes back and he said, "You know what that buzzard wanted?" I said, "No." He said, "He wanted us to cut the infield grass so we could see his infielders." And that was, Garagiola was something else. And we had all kinds of characters on that team, but the biggest character of all was Branch Rickey. I mean, he spoke in parables. We had a guy who was leading off. It wasn't Ed or I. And I'll not tell you his name to protect the innocent. And he got called in by Ricky one day, and Ricky said, "At best I can tell you, you're an idiot." And he said, "There you are. He said, I've got you leading off." He said, "To get on base for our power hitters, Kiner, Abrams, and Metkovich. And what are you doing? You're swinging at the 2-0 and the 3-1. At best you have warning track power. And he said, but I don't blame you. And it's nor your father or your great-grandfather. Because no one could get that stupid in 3 generations. And this guy comes out and he says, I think I just had my butt chewed out. And that's what, and Ricky liked Ed Knight. But he was the world's worst driver. And he'd take us out to his home. We had a lot of things at his home. And you know the yellow line going down there? He'd have one tire on one side, one on the other. He'd drive it like this, and he said, oh, this Pittsburgh's a wonderful town. Everybody honks to you as they go by. and then we're out there one day, and Branch was Branch Rickey. And everybody in the world called him Branch Rickey with the exception of Leo DeRocher. Leo DeRocher called him Branch. Well, he had a son, so we called the son Twig. So it was Branch and Twig. So Twig had us out at the farm one day, and we're shooting bows and arrows. And there's a big target there, and I lay it on the back and let it fly, and it misses the target, and it lands about 10 feet from Mr. Rickey's prize bull. So here he comes. And he said, Branch, talking to his son, I've noticed you got John and Edward pulling that 13-pound bow. And he said, they could possibly strain a muscle. And that would be bad for our plans with the Pirates. He said, so why don't we retire to the front lawn for a stimulating game of croquet? Instead of saying, get him out of here before he kills my bull, we're over there hitting them damn croquet balls. And he was just a marvelous guy.
I'll tell you one on Ricky. You don't usually often get this type of situation. If the general manager calls you to his office, that means you're on your way out of town. They're going to send you out. And it was a Saturday, and we had an evening game, which was a surprise. And he called us, wanted to see us in his office. So down we go. And he says, I have something I think would be of great interest to you boys. And a lot of people don't realize, but Forbesville was located right up next to the University of Pittsburgh, Mellon Park up in there. And he says, come with me. So we get walking across right there. You can walk right up to things. So we lumbered our way up there. And he comes in, I thought this would be of great interest to you boys. Which we didn't know what it was all about. But at the University of Pittsburgh, which was one tower building at that time, number one, it was never finished on the top because they thought education would always continue on. The second thing, completely surrounding the base when you come in, are what they call the world rooms. In other words, the French room, every stick, including whether it's a piece of chalk or something, came from France. Indian room, everything from that country. And he took 2 hours just walking us around, showing us these things. I thought that was kind of marvelous for a general manager to come up and take you on a tour like that. But that was the thing. There was a book printed on Ricky, and it started out, it named 9 professions. And it said Ricky would be the tops in any one of these professions. And one was lawyer. And he told us one time, he said, I was a lawyer. He says, I was a lawyer for one case. He says, I took this case, and he said it was a very loathsome man, terrible man. And he says, I got him off, and I felt so bad about it. He says, I quit being a lawyer. But he just was, a lot of things that people don't realize about Ricky, general manager, top guy on the team, never went to a Sunday game in the park. For his religious beliefs, he always stayed home, listened on the radio, but he never once went to the ballpark on Sunday. But he'd be down on the field talking to the players. In spring training, what happened is on Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday morning, just before we finished, they used to put a half hour in there just for Ricky to talk to the players. And he would get up in the stands, put us all sitting in the stands, Ricky would be down here, and he would talk. And it hardly ever was on baseball. theories of life and things of that nature. Well, all of a sudden, some people started drifting in. And next thing you know, we got the first base stands all full, just to listen to him talk. And they finally decided that he would talk at the Civic Center in town every Wednesday night for a half hour, and the place was just loaded. But he was such a brilliant man, and had a love for baseball.
You know, as you think along, you see a lot of stuff today in sports on concussions and stuff like that. Well, Branch Rickey was the forerunner or inventor of the plastic helmet. And I think we first used them in '53, wasn't it?
53, and in fact, what happened is we wore the hard hats that they wear today at the plate. Well, he made us wear them in the field and also at the plate. Well, it was kind of a novice type of thing, but they had straw bands around the inside, or a band, rubber band. So we all ended up getting scratches, on our head. So to be kind and gentle to us, they gave us all $25 at the end of the season for wearing the things and having to get through it. But it saved us. We were playing the Cubs in Chicago. Love Chicago. And the reason I love Chicago, it was the only place that didn't have lights. It had no lights. So you always went to Chicago and you were like the working people. You played during the day all the time. Great park. In one park I pitched my only start in the major leagues. Talk to you about it a little bit later. But you get memories of certain fields. You get memories of certain pitchers. I have, the first pitcher I hit against was the best pitcher in baseball at that time, called Robin Roberts of the Philadelphia Phillies. And Roberts, this will knock you over. 1953, that year, he started and completed 31 consecutive games. Now today they pitch 6 innings and they hit some imaginary wall. I don't know where the hell it came from. We played a game one night. We're playing Milwaukee. And John's got a story on a perfect game in Milwaukee, but I'll tell you this one. We're playing in Forbes Field, and it ended up being a 19-inning game. Ended at midnight or after midnight. And Burdette, what was Burdett's first name? Lou, yeah, that's right. Thank you, James. Lou Burdette. Lou Burdette pitched the first 11 innings of the game, and then they took him out. Vern Law started for us. At the end of 18 innings, Vern Law was still pitching. He pitched the first 18 innings for us. And Danny Murtaugh came to him and said, "That's it, Vern, I can't let you go any further." Vern got in a big argument with him in the dugout and said, "It's my game, I want to win it or lose it." Murtaugh held sway, and of course if the manager goes, you end up going with the manager's decision because you got no other choice. So he took him out and didn't let him pitch the top of the 19th. Well, Bob Friend we brought in, who was one of our good pitchers, but he gave up a run in the top of the 19th inning. We came back in the bottom of the 19th inning and got 2 runs, and Bob Friend pitched 1 bad inning and he won the game. And in fact, he even went to the official scorer and asked him if he could give the win to Law, but you couldn't do it. It was buried in cement. So things like that happen. We were involved in some great games, and still remember some of them. Some we want to forget. And this goes to another story. We have an alumni association it's out of Denver right now. It used to be out of Florida. And about 5-6 years ago, they came out for the All-Star game when it was Kingdom, so it was longer than that. They asked the former major league players from Washington to come to a cocktail party and go to the game. So we went. So they wanted to hold a meeting. So they hold a meeting, and the first thing they said, "We have some changes we wish you guys would agree to do. And the first one we want is we want you no longer to refer to yourself as retired Major League Baseball players. You are retired entertainers. And John stood up and says, bullshit. He said, a lot of days I did not entertain. They got mad at us. They got mad because there were 14 players, one a younger player that just had retired. He was going to go along with it. The other 13, no way. And then they said, you know, you're all getting bubblegum cards. And we want you to send the card back unless there's money in the envelope. Tell them you want a minimum of $15 for a card. And so the vote again was 13-1 not to do it. And they just were furious with us. So it shows the thinking that's changed in the game today. And they're making such money, you know, it's ridiculous. Their thinking that they don't want to, you know, help the fan that came out and support you and all of that. I got a letter from. You always get letters. I got a letter from one guy, and he said that he had written to Johnny Bench. Now you all know Johnny Bench, a great catcher and he asked him if he'd sign a card. And a card came back unsigned, and said if he wanted to send it back with $100 in it, he would sign it.
And a lot of that is the introduction into the baseball area of the agent and free agency. And the agent is saying, you know, that's the guy that's kind of pulling the strings a lot. I'll go back again to Pittsburgh, and remember I told you that in those days we were so bad we used to celebrate when we got rained out. Well, one night after a Saturday game, my wives and I were driving along. I'm driving, and I thought it was a yellow light, and I go through it, and the next thing, and this cop pulls me over. So he comes over and he says, you went through the red light. And I says, I'm sorry, officer, I thought it was yellow. He said, give me your license. So he went back to the back car and he said, we've got a bit of a problem here. He said, you have a New Jersey driver's license and there's Pennsylvania plates on this car. He said, where do you live? I said, Seattle, Washington. He said, now we got a bigger problem. He said, what are you doing here? I'm working. I said, I'm working here for the summer. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm playing second base for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He handed it me back and said, go ahead, you've got enough problems already. And then I think, you know, they talk these huge amounts of money nowadays. In our days, who was the gal that was the twin, the movie star?
Joan Colville?
No, the lady.
Joan Caulfield's a lady.
Not Joan Crawford. She used to have us on the TV program.
Oh, Lorraine Day.
Lorraine Day. Yeah, she was married to Leo DeRocher at the time, and she was a twin. She had a twin brother. So when we'd go into New York, she had a little program, and she'd always have Ed and I on it. And you know, and Kiner and all those big shots were always saying, "How the hell are you guys getting on that program all the time?" Because they were making $25. And Ed says, "Well, they're recognizing talent, you know."
What we also did a lot, there was a fellow named Bud Palmer, who was a basketball player for Columbia, I think. And he became kind of, not an agent, but he would place players on shows. And we ended up, we were on the Ed Sullivan show. We were on Milton Berle show. And simply because he would place you, and he never asked for any money or anything, just said, I'll get you guys something. But I got to remind you of something else.
Before you do that, I want to say something. This is how far back we go. We were at one time on the Don McNeil Breakfast Show. Can you imagine that, how far back that was? That was in the 1950s. Go ahead, Ed. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
We certainly did. We were in...
We stayed at a Commodore Hotel in New York City. And the Red Sox would usually be in at the same time we were in there. So Fred Haney put a midnight curfew on us. And Danny O'Connell, John and myself, are...
Was it Saturday night?
Saturday night. And what they used to have around the corner from the hotel was what they called the Actors' Mass. And it went at 12:30 at midnight, or to 12:30 a.m. So we're all sitting in the lobby, and Fred Haney was the manager. And O'Connell says, it's a pain getting up in the morning for the mass. He said, why don't we go ask Skip if we can hit that 12:30 mass? So we go over to Fred Haney, who was also Catholic, and said, could we skip curfew and go to the 11 or 12:30 mass so we don't have to do it in the morning? So Haney says, okay, permission given. So now we're sitting there waiting for the time to expire before we go, and in come these three gals. And they come walking right over to us. And they were not gals looking for us. They just were looking for somebody. So they came over and they asked us if we were such and such and such and such. And now we know we're in trouble. Haney's sitting there looking right at us. So Haney gets up, puts a paper underneath his arm, and he walked by us and he said, enjoy the mass. And to this day, he thought we, went with the ladies. Ladies, it did not happen.
But talking about things that happened for lesser value, I guess, in our days, in Ebbets Field, underneath the scoreboard, which was out in right center field, running all along the bottom part of the scoreboard, 7 feet high, was a sign. It was 3G suits. And if you hit that sign in the air, you got a free suit. Well, it was very difficult to do that because here's Duke Snyder and Carl Furillo out there. The sign is only 7 feet high and they're great outfielders. And it had only been hit once in 10 years by Red Schoendienst of the St. Louis Cardinals. So we're playing the Dodgers on a Friday night, and I'm batting against Padres with the pitcher. And he throws me a ball and I nail it into right center field and I slide into second base with a double. Now here comes Furillo, running in with the ball. You did it! You did it! You did it! You did it! And Dusty Bodges is the second base umpire. He says, Carl, what did he do? He said, he hit the sign in the air. He hit the sign in the air. He said, he's going to get a free suit. And Bodges said, we're holding up 25,000 people for this. He said, oh, shut up. I got to talk to John. He says, hey, John, now here's what's going to happen. And this is his exact words. You're going to get a call from the little Jew in the morning. And he says, it was Abe Stark, who was the acting mayor of New York, owned 3G Suits. And he said, they're going to send a limo over to get you, and they're going to bring you back, and they're going to give you a suit. And Bodges say, what's going on? He said, shut up. He said, now here's what you got to do for me. He said, you tell that little buzzard I've been guarding his sign for 10 years and he ain't done a damn thing for me. And I said, oh. And Bodges said, do you mind if we play baseball? So, just like clockwork the next morning, this limo comes over, picks me up, takes me back. Abe Stark suits, and if the picture of Abe Saperstein that's somewhere around here, if you look at Abe Saperstein, Abe Stark was the spitting image, just a short Jewish fella. And he came out and he said, congratulations, he hit the sign. It's on that one time in 10 years it had been hit by Red Schoendienst of the St. Louis Cardinals. He says, come on then and pick out the garment. So I go in, he says, not here. He said, the good garment's in the back. So I go and I see this sharp skin type thing, and I says, that. He says, that's a good selection. He says, we take the measurements, I send it over to the Forbes Field. I said, thank you, I appreciate it very much. I said, but I got to tell you something. I says, Furillo's really mad at you. He said, what's the matter with it, Carl? I said, he told me he's guarding your sign for 10 years, you haven't done a darn thing for him. It never done. He says, it never done. So, about a week later, the suit shows up. I'm wearing it one night, Ed's wearing it the next. We're getting a heck of a lot of good work out of that. And the Dodgers came in 2 weeks after that, and I'm in the batting cage taking bat practice, and Furillo runs right into the cage and hugs me. He says, thanks, oh, the little buzzard came through with 10 pair of slacks. And that was mixed up in those days, but Ed and I wore that suit out, man. We really had a good time with that.
I'm going to...
Go ahead, Ed.
I'm going to tell another one of the stories on John.
Can't you tell something on yourself?
We're at Seattle U, junior year.
we have a business law class.
Oh, yeah.
See, we reminded him of something. And a lawyer from downtown is teaching the class. So he comes in on a Tuesday after it's over. He announces, "I'm not going to be here the next 3 days." And he said, "What I'm going to do is I have a law case downtown. It's going to take a little while." And he said, "But I'm sending a substitute teacher. So what I want to do is I want you all to not miss my class. Consider it's me there." So next day we go to class, and here comes a woman lawyer. And she doesn't take roll. She lectures the whole hour for 50 minutes. Fine, so now comes Thursday. We go back to class, same woman, doesn't take roll, lectures for 50 minutes. So now comes Friday. And John says, "I'm not going to class." He says, "He's just not taking roll and just lecturing to it." I said, "Okay, I'll go." I go to class. She pulls out the book, takes roll. She goes out. She goes to Ed O'Brien, here. John O'Brien, here. So I answer for both of us because she's marking in the book, you know. Now I said, I could be in real trouble here. I'm sitting on the aisle, which helped a little bit. I had a green jacket on. Fourth person, John O'Brien. Up I get. She asked me a question, I give her the answer. Sit down. I said, "If she comes back with Ed O'Brien, I'm done." She does it, and she turned to the board to write something. I take the jacket off, I hand it to the guy next to me, and I'm on the other side of the aisle. About 6 later, Ed O'Brien, up I get. Now all guys were in the room. They're all just dying. She asks a question, and I give her the answer. At the end of class, they're all congratulating me. She's gone. She doesn't know to this day it happened, and neither does the professor. But the sad part was, I got a C for my answer, and John got an A for his.
I've always said I was smarter than him. You know, I got to tell you, there was a lot of ego in some of these players that played in our day, but not very many of them. But we were in the Polo Grounds playing the Giants, and Don Little, and he was little left-handed pitcher. He hit me in the head with a ball. So I get up and I go down to first base. And Whitey Lockman's playing first base for the Giants, and Little is straddling the mound and looking over and just glaring. And Lockman says to me, "What's going on?" I says, "I don't know." And nothing's happening. And finally, Little yells over, "Rub it, damn it, rub it." Because I hadn't rubbed my head when he hit me in the head. And so I yelled back, "You can't throw hard enough to make me rub it." And he wouldn't pitch. And there's a big argument going on. And finally, DeRocher comes out. DeRocher used a lot of foul language. And he's screaming bloody murder. Little won't pitch. And the umpire's trying to get the game started. Finally, DeRocher comes to me and says, "O'Brien, rub your head." He said, "I got a date after the game." But those were some goofy little things that went on all the time. We had a pitcher. We never, as I mentioned, who was playing for the Dodgers. If you noticed, with the exception of Snyder in center field, they were all right-handed batters. So you never threw a left-handed pitcher against the Dodgers. You always threw right-handers. Well, they were in Forbes Field one day, and our pitchers, all their arms were down by their knees or by their feet because they've been throwing so much. And Haney's looking around for a pitcher, and we had a fellow named Roger Bowman, big left-handed thrower. "Give me the ball, I'll show them." Haney said, "Be my guest." Well, we start playing. At the end of 3 innings, we're behind 9-0. Every time Bowman had a pretty good fastball and then a big overhand curve. And every time he threw that curve, bam! Reese had a home run, Perillo had a home run, Hodges had a home run, Campanella had a home run. They had about 5 or 6 home runs at the end of 3 innings. And Haney figured the heck with it, I'm not gonna waste a pitcher and let Bowman do it, so Bowman is really hot. And Pee Wee hits a ball down the Ed at shortstop, the ball bounces up, hits Ed in the shoulder. Ed gets it, he's got no throw, he gives it to O'Connell, and O'Connell's holding the ball like this, and Bowman screams at him, "Give me that ball, give me that ball!" And O'Connell slowly walks over and he says, "Okay, Raj," he says, "I'm just trying to keep it in the ballpark a little longer." Bowman went like Lot's wife. He was turned to salt. His neck, I thought he was going to burst. And he couldn't pitch. And Haney was so mad he was going to make O'Connell pitch, but we brought Hugh Duffy Schultz out of the bullpen. And that's a story that will continue with Edward.
Hugh Duffy was kind of, the bullpen was in left field. They had what they called Kiner's fence because the park was so big. It was 365 feet down the left field line, a big scoreboard of 25 feet, 407 feet in left center, 469 feet in center field. The park was so big that the batting cage was in center field during the actual game. 407 in right center, 324 down the right line with a big screen. Never a no-hitter pitched in the park because it was too big.
It's 93 years.
See, what happened is you'd get to your normal position and go back 2 steps because if it got by, it would be a triple instead of a double or maybe an inside the park home run. But Duffy's now coming in and he comes walking by me. He says, "I'll show these guys." I said, "Oh, Duff, don't." First guy up is Pee Wee Reese. First pitch, he knocks him down. Reese gets up and says, "Duffy, the horse is out of the barn. Knock it off." The next guy is Snyder. Snyder says, "Throw 3 over the plate. They won't even swing at him." He knocked him down. Then he knocked down Campanella, and he knocked down Gil Hodges. So now Haney's thinking, "Oh my God, what's he doing?" So the next hitter was Ferrello, knocked him down, and what's his name? Our manager Haney went out to the mound, pulled him out of the game. Who do you think's leading off the next inning? Me. I'm leaving the dugout, and Kiner says, "You better screw that bonnet on pretty tight." So I'm in that batter's box, and my spikes, I've got them so they hardly can get in the sand. First pitch. Umpire. Ball 1. Today there'd been a monumental fight going on. Second pitch. Ball 2. Third pitch. Ball 3. I said, now he's going to get me out. They had a guy named McMinn throwing that could throw real hard. Fourth pitch. Right at my head. 4 in a row right at my head. And I'm laying in the dirt there, and Campanella says, "Ed, tell the boys now he's even." That's the end of it. But somebody had to take the brunt of it, and it ended up being me. But going back to agents, when we were sitting in a bar, Terry was with us when we went back for some function, and we were sitting with Clem Labine, a pitcher that had won 17 games for the Dodgers. And we got talking, and finally he said, "You know, I may have been the first guy that had an agent." He said, "I had won 17 games, and he said, I matched my salary. I got $17,000. But he said, I decided I wanted $25,000. So he said the contracts would come in December. It'd be from the general manager. And they just mail you a contract in the mail, just a regular mail. And then you either signed it or asked for a meeting. If you asked for a meeting, it was with the general manager and usually one other guy, so they always had a 2-to-1 advantage on you. And I asked for a meeting. So I talking to my friend, and he said, "You know what?" He says, "I'm a lawyer." He said, "I think I could go back there, and I think that I could help you out getting your $25,000. Or 20,000. He wanted 20, not 25. And he said, "I think I could do that." And he said, "Okay, come with me." He said, "Oh, you met at the ballpark at Ebbetsfield." He said, "We go upstairs, and here's Buzzy Bavasi, the general manager, and his head scout. And he's sitting there, and we sit down, and Buzz says, "Oh, what are you here for?" He says, "Well, I want to talk about my contract. I want $20,000. I think I deserve it, and I'm going to pursue it with you, man to man." He says, okay. He says, who's he? He says, he's my lawyer. He's going to help me talk. And basically he said, never batted an eye. He said, get him out of this room or our offer from 17,000 goes down to 15,000. He said, I threw my own agent out of the room. He said, I came back and just signed the papers and left. He said, we never even talked about it. So those little things happen as you're in the game. Go ahead, John.
Well, I was just thinking it wouldn't be appropriate to be talking about baseball and the things that happen if we didn't bring up the fact that we are friends of Yogi Berra. And Yogi was an all-time character. And the first time we met Yogi was in Forbes Field. We would play one game a year, either at Yankee Stadium or in Forbes Field, for the benefit of youngsters with cancer. And Ted Williams was the national deal for baseball, and we would play this game, exhibition game, somewhere during the season. Well, they were in Pittsburgh this year, and I came down the dugout, and Yogi's sitting in our dugout. And he said, where's Dem O'Brien's? And I said, I'm one of them, Yogi. He says, you and your brother got to do me a favor. I said, what? He said, you got to teach my kids basketball, then I don't have to pay their way through school. And that's the way Yogi was. He was a real character. And he was over, before he got to the Yankees, he was over in Newark in the International League with Allie Clark, one of the 5 guys from our high school that wound up in the major leagues, and Tommy Heinrich. And they were all trying to get to the major leagues, but they were having a difficult time because there were so many good players on the Yankees. So finally they brought Yogi up. And in one of his very first games, he played right field. Yogi was an outfielder as well as a catcher. And he gets up 4 times that day and gets 3 hits. And the next day, Yogi's in the locker room, and Red Smith, the great writer for the New York Times, sports writer, comes in. And Yogi's looking at the paper, and it goes down there, and it said, Berra, right field, 2 for 4. So Yogi was over to Red Smith, and he says, what the heck's going on here? He says, I got 3 hits, not 2. Red Smith looked at it, and he said, don't worry, typographical error. And Yogi said, BS, it was a clean base hit. And I asked Red Smith later, I said, did that actually happen? He says, yeah, and he says, when it did, I knew I really had something. And Yogi was a real character. He's 88 years old now. We almost went to see him when we were back east last year, but we didn't get a chance to.